Okay, so I want to talk about something that's been coming up lately. And so anytime something comes up 3 times, that's usually what it does. And then that's where I direct my focus, because that's where I'm seeing something bigger picture happening. And with this has come up a few times, and it's really apparent in a bigger picture scheme of things as well. And so it's our awakening process, and how can that awakening process actually be dysfunctional or lead us down a path of like further suffering, or create problems like spiritual bypassing, too much emphasis on shadow work, basically bring us more into dysfunction rather than being this simple ascending path, which we would hope it would be, to become something greater and more whole. And so let's just look at the process of awakening. And Alicia and I, we have our course, Accelerate Awakening, and in that course we talk about the stages of awakening, right? And so we cover this in that, but this is more specific to one element of that. And the reason is because we looked at other people's stages of awakening, and it was missing this component. This component is key. It's like it's number one. If we're missing this, we are probably going to set ourselves up, or our students, for possible disaster, possible not really getting through what the challenge is really all about. So awakening, it can be anything that relates to personal growth, interpersonal spiritual growth, anything, very general. And the reason why everyone should have an awakening in this lifetime is because we are never going to find fulfillment outside of ourselves. It's impossible. It's literally, the external world is separation, and that separation creates a condition in us, which is self-separation, and that leads to fear, doubt, negativity, blame, judgment, control, power, ownership, all the stuff of being human. It's also what gives us free will and self-expression, so that's positive. But the flip side, the duality of it, is there's a lot of negative too. So a lot of the reason people strive for an awakening is to find something greater meaning within themselves. Even if you're not someone who focuses on that, it's still, the principles here are the same. If we're not finding peace and wholeness within ourselves, we're not going to find it in the outside world. It's got to come from within. So there's always going to be that striving for something more. So usually what happens is people go through their life, whatever, they have an awakening experience, or something draws them to something bigger. It's like, oh, aha, wow, I want that. It could be, a trip to Peru, or an ayahuasca experience, or Burning Man, or just like walk in nature, or a yoga class, or something someone said to you that just kind of woke you up. And so then you go down sort of that seeking path, and that's where we have to be careful. As soon as we experience that awakening, and then we choose to alter or choose to seek that out more, what that awakening experience is doing is it's changing our view of ourself and our reality. It's literally going against the conditioned aspect of the ego. So the ego is there. It basically comes into our life when we're a child. The first time we see ourselves in the mirror and we identify ourselves as a separate object from everything else, that's when the ego comes in. And then it builds this understanding of self and our existence based on separation. That's why we have all the challenge, all the way down to stress and oxidative stress and physical conditions, physical problems, is really because of duality or self-separation created by the ego. So when we awaken to wholeness and totality and connection, we're challenging that, we're removing that. That's a whole different paradigm. And so what happens is that that's what we want. Absolutely. We want to go down that path, but we have to be very careful, because the ego is super smart and super crafty. There's a resurgence of the ego, and that's the stage we're talking about. That it's kind of missing in this whole process of awakening. It's not simple. It's not going through these steps. It's really complicated. And this is where it gets really complicated and really nasty, is that the more we experience that awakening, the more our ego is going to feel challenged. And so what that can do is it can then sort of come into us. Basically, it can create doubt. It can create like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Friends, family can doubt the process. The world around us is going to doubt the process, because the world around us doesn't understand it. even if someone else is going through an awakening and we go through it, it's going to be so different. They might doubt your awakening. So we can't let the world define whether it's right or wrong. We have to know that within ourselves. That's just kind of a general stepping stone of that resurgence of the ego, the doubt, the fear around it, right? Something's totally different, totally unknown. What is this? But what comes in a lot is the seeking. The seeking then seeks outside of ourself for more of that. And that means like, you know, Buddha, right? Or crystals, or, you know, oracle cards, whatever it is, or a retreat, or a yoga class, or a different guru. There's almost this longing to belong within ourselves that we can fulfill through our awakening, but then that longing to belong then starts to build attachments outside of ourselves to what's going to create my awakening, or what's going to be that next thing that allows me to go deeper into it. And that's where that's the critical error here, is that we have to, now these things are fine, perfectly fine to study different beliefs, to study or to do different classes, go to different teachers, use crystals. This stuff all works, right? But we have to be sure that we realize that the underlying cause of our condition and why we're awakening in the first place is the ego, and that we need to address the ego first. And we address the ego through wholeness, completion, totality, the power of now. We have to reverse engineer that process. So these things can get us there, but we have to realize that it's not the things that are doing it, it's within us. And so this is why a daily practice, whatever brings you into wholeness, find what does it. For us, it's breath work and meditation. It gets us deep. The breath is the most powerful tool we've found. Whatever gets you there, use that continually, because what you're doing is you're reverse engineering that whole process of self-separation. And you're creating wholeness instead. But you got to break through the ego, because the ego's going to come in and go, ha, 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 I'm going to hold you back. You're not doing that. It wants control. So it's going to do nasty things to do that. That's where we get in that process. We focus outside of ourselves for the solution. It doesn't work. We don't get it anymore. We're still lost. We're still feeling suffering, pain, and anxiety. We start to doubt. We create shadows. This is where actually shadow work to a certain point is okay. It's okay to know it's there. I kind of look at it like, there's a reason why the rear view mirror is so small and your windshield's so big. It's more important to me to focus on the light rather than the darkness. Because when we focus on the shadow, it's kind of directing ourselves around the shadow. It's going to sort of bring us into the shadow. So, and that's what can happen as we keep striving for it. We keep trying to find it outside of ourselves. We're not. We're creating these shadows, and we focus on the shadows. And the shadows are just part of the ego. The ego's like got full control in the shadow. So that's something we want to be aware of. That longing to belong, your next guru, people like, oh, I want to leave my husband or my wife or these friends, I'm just over them now. That's really spiritual bypassing. We do not want to do that. It's a huge problem of this. We want to know that everything is in our lives for a reason. We're going through this process, and we can work through it with those aspects that have built us to what we are now, and understanding why. Before we don't move on from them, we just simply sort of see the bigger picture of what their meaning is, and maybe we elevate those aspects in our lives with us. That's what, that would be a true noble spiritual path, where we're not necessarily renouncing and letting go of those things that have been there that we feel are holding us back, but rather we try and bring them forward with us. But in order to have that guidance, we have to have wholeness within ourselves. That's the key, is the inner guidance comes from the wholeness. That's where connection to our soul. So that's where we're going to have the inner guidance. Now, how do we know we're past that resurgence of the ego? That's the stage. Is that when we literally feel this sense of the unknown. This is now the true meaning of the dark night of the soul. We're in this vast, unknown, empty space, because the ego and our concept of reality, we've now moved on from it truly to a point where we're now going down this path that is free of that. And so now there's this big, vast, empty unknown, dark night of the soul. The snake shedding its skin. It's like the pain of the caterpillar in the cocoon that leads to the emergence of the butterfly. It's the phoenix rising from the ashes. There's this pain, there's this unknown darkness, but in it's beautiful. To me, it's the meaning of Christ on the cross. It's this sacrifice of the self, of the ego, in order to emerge into a higher sense of self. That's when we know we've gotten past the ego and the resurgence of the ego. It's going to come back always. These stages aren't fluid, but on a bigger picture, that's how we know. When we're no longer afraid of dying, or we're no longer afraid of losing the identity, losing the attachments, losing those things that were holding us back, we can just simply strip them away, whatever that is in our life, that identity of who we think we are, we can just let go of it. And then at that point, that's when our true awakening is happening. That's when we're really in that awakening period. We're now connected. We're in that void, that sense of wholeness, totality, and completion. We gain the inner guidance. We are on that path now of ascension, rather than being stuck in that cycle of why is this not working for me. So I hope that helps. Would love to hear your feedback, any questions. If that applies to you, just respond in the comments below. Have an awesome day.